Are we ready to go, Gretchen? And we got a couple of presentations today. First order of business, call this meeting to order, but is approval of the February 28th minutes. Ms. Duncan, Ms. Blair, any questions, comments, concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Next, we have informational items. Move to receive and file all those except the Joint Commission on Racial Justice and Equity update. We're lucky enough to have Mr. Birchie and Ms. Peterson here today to give us an update on their progress. So unless there's any questions on the other three, we'll move to that presentation. Okay, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Turn around. I like that. My name is Mary Peterson, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Joint Commission on Racial Justice and Equity. I have with me here Tim Birchie, the other co-chair, my partner in crime. Thank you for this opportunity this afternoon to come before you to report out on what we have been doing with the Joint Commission on Racial Justice and Equity. Approximately about a year and a half ago, this body and the City Council approved this commission. In the report that you all have, we talk about how this commission came about, and we also give you some history as it relates to Peoria and Peoria County. The mission itself is to accelerate efforts to institutionalize racial justice and equity within county and city government, and to advance its adoption into regional areas. Equity. Equity was specifically defined as fair and just opportunities for all people. So with this mission presented a challenge for us. It brought the question to mind whether today, whether there's racial disparity that impacts justice and equity. We began addressing this by looking at data. Collecting data, creating a baseline to talk about and to look at whether there were material disparities within races in the community, how large or how small were those disparities, and could we find data to support or not support what was said to be some of the key issues. What we're going to present to you here this afternoon is that we did find data and that there are major disparities amongst the races here in Peoria and Peoria County. We did this by working on through 4 stages, and Tim's going to talk about our 4-stage work plan, how we've been going about accomplishing what it is we were tasked to do, and how we're going to continue to move forward with that. Tim?
Thank you very much, Mary. Can everybody hear me? Danny, can you hear me over there? All right, great. I just have to, one note I have to say, looking at Danny and Jimmy and Brandy, when I first started appearing in front of the county board, their parents were involved with politics and the county board and everything, and I'm in the next generation. Phil Salzer and I go back far enough that I don't even want to think about how far we go back together. But in any case, it's a delight to be here, and thank you so much for having us be with you today. As Mary said, our work began about a year and a half ago, and we talked at the outset about how we were going to go about this and came up with a 4-stage work plan. And really, it's nothing more than common sense, and it's a type of plan that I'm sure everyone here has gone through in some of the work that they've done. First, the question was, can we create a baseline in our community to show where we stand with disparity between the races? Are there disparities? Are they just in some areas? Are they in other areas? And to some extent, how do they tie together? So, number 1, create a baseline. Number 2 is to develop strategic plans to address areas of material disparity. And the concept there was to take the baselines we had developed and begin to create high-level strategic ideas about how we were going to address the issues that we found. Point 3 then is to say, okay, now that we've got some strategic plans, how are we going to implement that? What are we going to do to specifically make the changes that we think are needed? And 4th, how do we implement and monitor? Now that we've got the plan, how in fact do we carry it out, and how do we monitor it going forward? And as Mary indicated, we thought that it was very important, and the communities we've talked to that have done this, they told us it was very important, to base our work upon data. Anecdotes are fine, stories of people's lives are fine, they all have meaning, they all have relevance, but in the end, data is what is convincing to the community, data is what's convincing to the organizations that we are dealing with, and data tells us whether we're going to be successful or not successful in the end. So our plan was to have a data-driven process. Number two, to supplement that with life experiences of those people that are impacted by issues of disparity. And then four, and this is number three part of our process, is to supplement this with the experiences of other communities. Our community is not the only one that's undertaken the type of process that we're talking about here. Seattle might be the most noteworthy, but it's not the only one. Communities from the size of Seattle and Washington, D.C., to communities the size of Dubuque, Iowa, have engaged in the types of processes that we're talking about. So, data-driven, supplemented with life experiences of people here, supplemented by the experience of other communities. So, 2022, our report, the report that's in front of you today, is the conclusion of phase one of that effort, the baseline creation. And you'll see throughout, and we're going to talk about this today, are the statistics that we found that prove the case for racial disparities within our community. Now, we know that with data, it's very important that the data comes from a trustworthy and reliable source. So where did we get our data from? You'll see footnotes at the end of our report. But in essence, these numbers in our report come from the U.S. Census Bureau, the Illinois State Board of Education, the U.S. EPA, Peoria City and County Police Records, and the Peoria County Health Department. Those were our primary data sources. You'll see that we have included at some places and not others data on our Hispanic or Latinx community. Unfortunately, in the way that data is kept by some of these organizations, there is no data with respect to our Hispanic population. So where we could include it, we have included it. Where we did not include it, please don't take any inference other than the fact that we just could not obtain that data. And in fact, I will tell you that one of the things I think we're thinking about is whether or not one of our recommendations ultimately is going to be that we need better data keeping about some of these racial groups in our community that we have no data for now. So our commission was divided into 9 groups, and you're going to see that data presented in these groupings. And so let me turn to Mary and ask her to talk a little bit about our 9 groups. And you'll see, you can look at the screen. Mary will describe it.
So the steering committee, of course, is we steer the commission in terms of helping write process, putting together the booklet, providing direction for our 8 subcommittees. And they consist of child and youth development, economic development and jobs, environment and climate, health and human services, housing, information and technology, justice, transportation, and mobility. These subcommittees mirror the King County in Washington, their commission. So with that, each committee had a charge, including the steering committee, to look at indicators, data. With the steering committee, we looked at life expectancy. There's a 15-year difference between the life expectancy of a black person and a white person. We looked at median house value, the value of a house, and we've seen and heard talking about houses in terms of sometimes the appraisal, where it will come in based on the appraiser and what they think we'll be able to get based on race. You see there the median value of a house. You also see in terms of assistance from food assistance, 47.4% of black families, 23.2% of Hispanic families, and 14.5% white families receive food assistance or SNAP benefits. And you have this, but we're just going to highlight some major points in this. So now, child and youth development. When you look at these numbers, 64.7 children are not ready for kindergarten. And what does it mean to be ready for kindergarten? It means developmental domains that contribute to the success of a child and their ability to adapt to a classroom environment. We're looking, some of those domains is physical, social, emotional, language, math, and cognitive skills at age 5, and in terms of whether they're ready. And when you look at kindergarten, if they're not ready for kindergarten, and you start to look at these other numbers, it decreases in terms of readiness. When you look at the English proficiency, you look at math, and we know that language and math are the cornerstones in terms of education, and that propels you and moves you forward. Truancy, 59.2%, 40.9%. The question begs, why is there truancy? Is it just on the youth themselves, or is there other indicators that are creating that large disparity? Economic development and jobs. Median household income. When you start to look at hourly, when you look at white men make $1, black men make 87 cents on the dollar, Hispanic men make 91 cents on the dollar. Then you look at women. Black women make 0.63% on the dollar. Hispanic women make 0.58. When you start talking about a household income, you can see how there could be, how these disparities come about. And then unemployment and the rates in terms of living in poverty. Economic, environment and climate. When you talk about Environmental Justice Index, it's an index that was started, and it's a national place-based tool designed to measure the cumulative impact of environment, the burden through the lens of human health and health equity. There are 12 of those indexes. These zip codes in Peoria, they are 90% at a national level. When you look nationally, 90 percentile, 11 of those out of 12. Health and Human Services. Black babies, 3.25 die compared to white babies. Black people die at a higher, much higher rate of cancer and cardiovascular or heart disease. Housing. Now housing, if you look at budgeting, budgeting says that your home, your housing should not be more than 30% of your income. Well, when we look at these numbers here, you've got blacks and Hispanics are nearly a third higher in terms of what they pay for their mortgage or rent. You also see, when you start talking about renting versus home ownership, 66.8% black families rent their homes, which is higher than the national average, which is 58%. Tim's going to talk about the next 4 subcommittees.
Well, the next one we're going to talk about is somewhat subtle. It's information and technology. Typically, when the discussion pertains to racial disparity, we think about life expectancy, we think about joblessness and things of that nature. But information technology is a key for today's world, and we all know that. John Lewis, in fact, said that information technology issues were the civil rights issue of the 21st century. And we agree with that as a commission. Technology, access to technology is critical for the success of any person today, whether that's a young person or an older person. And that involves access to the internet, and not just access, but access to high-speed internet, and making certain that people at even a base level have adequate technology within their home that they can connect up to that highway. Certainly all of us are familiar too with the fact that with the pandemic that we just went through, so many people were homeschooled or had to rely upon access via the internet to obtain schooling during that time period. That again, that's an indicator of how important this is to us going forward. Microsoft creates a digital equity score, and what they look at are a variety of factors within a community. 25-year-olds without a high school diploma, households without a desktop or laptop computer, households with internet or broadband or not having that, percent of people using internet at less than broadband speed, and percent of income spent on broadband. Because obviously, even if you have access, if you can't afford it, it's like not having it. And what we found, and we had to look at this geographically because records are not kept on this from a racial standpoint. But what we found was that among those census tracts, for example, 02, 05, et cetera, that have a primary population of people of color, is that there was digital inequity as defined by the Microsoft Digital Equity Score. Now, frankly, I will tell you that someone smarter than me has to figure out all the algorithms that go into creating that score. But I think all of us, regardless of understanding that, can appreciate the concept, again, that if you don't have access, and you don't have access to high-speed internet, and you don't even have an up-to-date computer, there are problems with your future. And that's what this is about. And again, there's a disparity there. Next is the justice system. And this question is so huge, and particularly, I guess, to me as a lawyer, it's fascinating. The difficulty of getting one's arms around it is what's fascinating. And we could have taken a look at this in many different ways. We could have looked at it from the standpoint of black youth, which we did, as you'll see. We could have looked at it from the standpoint of black adults. We could have looked at it from the standpoint of those people who were incarcerated and they came out, et cetera. There are any number of ways we could have gone at this. What we thought it was best to do was narrow our focus and deal with some issues that we felt we could rapidly get our arms around and address, and in particular youth. So that we did discover this shocking statistic. It's the top one here, and that is that the population of the Peoria County Juvenile Detention Center is 79% black, 16% white, and 5 other. What this means is that for every 5 children that go into the Juvenile Detention Center, 4 of them are black young men and women from our population. 80%. Next, in 2021, Peoria police arrested 387 black juveniles to only 35 white juveniles. Shocking. And then if we just look at traffic stops, because I know a lot of people think about traffic stops as being related to this, it paints the same picture. Black drivers comprise 61% of the traffic stops in the city of Peoria, despite blacks being only 27% of the population. Now, we might be able to quibble about 58% versus 61% or 63% versus 61%, but 61 versus 27%, that number is a harsh but true indicator of the justice system in our community. Let me turn now to transportation and mobility. Again, we looked at this somewhat geographically because a lot of these statistics are not kept from a racial standpoint, but if you look at, again, geographic data, it paints a picture consistent with all the rest that we told you today. 15% of Peoria households do not own an automobile. The most prevalent areas of zero-vehicle households are overwhelmingly in zip codes 02, 03, and 05. Again, highly populated, overwhelmingly populated by people of color. And the Greater Peoria Mass Transit District Microtransit Study showed that graphically, zip codes 02, 03, 05 are underserved by grocery stores, drugstores, and retail outlets. Also, that blacks are much more likely to depend upon public transportation than whites to get to work and for general commuting. Now, here's the significance of the last 2 things I said. When you're in an area that is a desert for grocery stores, drugstores, and retail outlets, and when you're in an area that's a desert for jobs, and when you don't have cars like to the extent the rest of the people have, you have to depend upon public transportation to get your basic needs. And so transportation and mobility issues are directly related to the disparities that we're talking about. Now, some of you, as you listen to what Mary and I just went through, the 8 groups and plus the steering committee, you might say to yourself, well, you know, I see connections here. There have to be connections here. And if you thought that, you are absolutely right. We see it too. Let's take this example. Transportation is tied to car ownership, right? And car ownership is tied to the fact you have an income so you can buy a car. And income is tied to the fact that you have a job, that you can get to the job. It's tied to your education. And then having a job and education is tied to transportation because you got to get to your job. And so all these things have a way of tying together: education, transportation, jobs, crime, and the like. And we see these connections, and working through these connections, working together, is part of what we ultimately will do. But the important takeaway today is the following. We have in our community racial disparities that are significant. In every category, in every area that we looked at, we have material racial disparities between our population, members of our population. And these are consistent across the board. They are material, as I said, and they are not coincidental. They are not coincidental. But there's some things we can do about this. So we next move to a discussion about our next steps of our commission. So Mary?
So our next steps. So we've completed phase 1, and that we've compiled the baseline so that as we talk about seeing a picture, having a picture, so that when someone says it's not real because they're looking through their lens, we have documentation that says it is real. But we didn't start this process. This is not new, looking at racial equity in Peoria and Peoria County. There are other organizations that have come before us that has done some of this work. And one of the charges that we've given ourselves is to find those reports and then put them on our website so that references, so that those who participated in those events and those activities and had those town halls, they will know that their voices have been heard. And so that you need to know where you came from in order to build your path to where you're headed to. So we're looking back and taking some of those lessons, some of that information to help move us forward. And so that's going to be a part of our website that's being constructed. We also are looking at the Racial Equity Impact Assessment Tool. This will provide city and county government, once adopted, with a tool to make the assessment when you're making policies, budgets, any changes, anything that you're looking at. You will be intentional and looking at how does that impact all, not just one group who you may be representing. How does that impact? And it's going to be intentional because you will do it in the planning stages. And that is the Racial Equity Impact Assessment Tool. Next, we're going to gather information. We've gathered data, which is your quantitative. Now we need to gather qualitative data. We're going to go back into the community and say, this is what we found. Is this true? Do you feel? Because we all look at things differently based on our experiences, our exposure, and a variety of other things. Do you feel that this is accurate? And if so, what are some of your recommendations for change? If not, then tell us what is. What is the reality? Because everything we know does not get caught in data, and you can make data say what you want to make it say. So we want the voices to go behind and to go along with the data. So we'll be engaging our partners in the community, our allies in the community that have different groups and organizations. And when we say the community, we're talking not only Peoria, but we're talking about Peoria County. We're talking about going to Chillicothe. We're talking about going to some of the other communities and not just looking at Peoria, because this is a city and this is a county issue and concern. Tim, you want to tell them about the other items that we're going to do in our next steps?
And I want to build on one thing Mary just said about going out to the community. There are those people that would say, okay, well, the city of Peoria itself may have an issue, but I live in the far reaches of Peoria County, and maybe that doesn't apply to me. We want to engage with our county board members who represent districts, geographic districts that extend way beyond Peoria to Glassford, Chillicothe, Princeville, Hannah City, etc. And we will be talking with you because we want to engage those communities in this discussion as well. And then as I mentioned this earlier, let me just say again that we want to see what other communities are doing to address these issues. And there actually is a nationwide clearinghouse. It's called GARE, Governmental Alliance of Racial Equity. You are a member. The county is a member of that alliance. And so we will draw upon them to provide us information as too. From all that we've just talked about, then, our plan will be to develop some high-level strategic plans. That is phase 2. That will last roughly until the end of this year, we think, and we will be back to talk with you at the end of the year about where that stands. So there's a couple things I'd like to just say in closing. And obviously, we're happy to take any questions that you might have, too. First of all, we have some members of our commission that are here today. We don't have time to go to identify every single one, but they're behind me. So if they'd raise their hands. Appreciate all of them being here today and the support that they've provided to us through this process. You appointed them, and all of us are responsible to you for that appointment. Number 2, I want to thank the city and county staff for their strong support throughout this process. And I mean that sincerely. We've asked for a lot of data. We've asked for a lot of help. And each time that Mary or I place a call or an email or text message to Scott or to Patrick, we get nothing but a positive response. And I'd say that's true also of Mayor Ali and Chairman Dillon. We get nothing but positive responses from them moving forward, and expect to do so moving forward. The next thing I want to do is, and this is extremely heartfelt, I want to thank you, our county board members, and I want to thank the city council members too. We're going to see them tonight, and I'll say something to them as well. And here's why. If you look through this book, and it's going to the media too, and it'll be online so the whole world can see it, it does not paint a flattering picture of the racial disparities existing within our community. Now, other communities, frankly, would never have headed down this path. Other communities would have hidden the information that we obtained, would have hushed it. We gave the information to Patrick at the city and to Scott here at the county, and to our and to Chair Dillon and to Mayor Ali. They never asked us to change one bit of information. They made no effort to hide it, no effort to hush it. And they made no effort to make it not public. Other communities would do this, but my point is we are not other communities. We recognize, all of you recognize, I believe, that pride and embarrassment do not stand in the way of improving the lives of the citizens in our community. And that solving problems involves study, it involves acceptance, it involves transparency, and it involves ownership of those problems. We appreciate the opportunity that you have given us to do the work we've done so far. We hope that you'll take ownership of this report as well as we've taken ownership of this report. And we thank you for your support, and we ask for your continuing support as we move forward with the process which you've entrusted to us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary and Tim. Questions for them? Member Renault.
Thank you for the report, and thank you to everybody who serves on the commission. I appreciate all your efforts. You've done some great work, and I appreciate data. I'm a data guy, so I appreciate that you're looking at data-based. One of the things that I challenged the mayor when she was here and for starting this commission was how are we going to sustain it long term? Because some of the goals that we have to be realistic are multi-generational goals. And how are we going to, so people don't have to look back at this and say, what did they do? How can we sustain the progress that you started by getting youth involved, because I think we need to start training and getting the youth of the community involved in this process so that they can pick up the torch once everybody else is tired and continue this. Because like I told her then, I don't want my son to have to go through this again in 10 and 20 years. You know, let's continue this progress. So when you're doing your strategic planning, I challenge you all again to how are we going to sustain the work that you're doing, and so that you can just keep it going. So, but thank you for everything you've done already.
Thank
That
you.
is a challenge, without a doubt. I appreciate your recognition of that.
And as we will include that in strategic plan. We have a group that's looking at some short-term and long-term communication plans and how do we recruit and retain members. And so we do have a young lady who's on the steering committee that was high school, now she's college. And so we've had some communications with her. How do we engage more high school students? And she's given us some ideas of how to do that, and that will be one of our tasks to do that. So very good point, thank you. Someone else
Member
have-
Allison.
Well, I guess I really just want to thank you guys for how thorough this is. And unfortunately, so often committees and groups are created with great intentions, but they end up just kind of repeating the problems that we already know. And it looks like, obviously, I haven't read through this in entirety, just looking at the first page, the fact that you indicated where our roots initially started here, you know, as a community, tells me, and then of course the slideshow additionally, but shows me how thorough you're really looking at this, trying to make steps forward rather than continuing to state the problems we already know we have. So thank you for really digging in and trying to take us forward.
Thank you very much.
Member Ricker.
Yeah, and again, like my fellow board members, thank you for the thoroughness and the details, because getting the baseline set is critical, and making sure everybody understands where we're at. And Mary, your comments of also looking back to our history, because you can take one point in time and say, we're here. How did we get here is really important. So I had a couple other just thoughts, like some of the others. Tim, you mentioned kind of the correlation of some of the metrics. Back to having the ability to have a vehicle for transportation, to have a job, to be able, and education to get the job. But one of the things that our health department's done a great job educating me on is it's about nutrition and health of the young population, so they can be ready to be well educated, take in the education. So I guess I'd ask, and I know if Monica was here, she would do a great job of explaining that, but let's not miss some metrics around the availability of nutrition and health care for not only for young children, but I start with young children because they're the ones that you need as your readiness for school, your 5-year-olds. Shame on us if we don't have 5-year-olds ready to be in the education system. So I ask that.
Let me stop you right there if I could.
Yep.
You are absolutely right. And Dr. Francesca Armour, one of our commission members and co-chair of our Health and Human Services Committee, is here with us today. That committee and Dr. Armour and her co-chair in particular have a marvelous relationship with Monica Henderson. And let me just say that I think because of that, some of the points you're raising about Monica's issues and concerns around that will tie directly into what we're doing. And this committee is really working, I would say, very well with the health department right now.
No, I appreciate it. I assume I saw Dr. Armour over here too, and so just wanted to make sure we all take that in. And I assume you did, but it wasn't mentioned, so I wanted to put that out there. Also, your comments of looking at other communities that already have progressed on this journey. I'd assume you've looked at some what I'll call best practices of what metrics they looked at that were important, which is great. And then the last, I made notes and you answered them, of making sure we're taking in all of Peoria County, because Bartonville and Chillicothe, other parts of our county have similar struggles, I think, as we progress to find solutions and improvements to the situation we have here, they will apply in many other ways around the county. It's becomes more than a racial disparity. It becomes more of a, education and nutrition and health. Everyone needs it. So again, I think there's a lot more to win out of this as we move forward. So appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Member Salzer?
I'm just going to comment, yes, we all appreciate the work you're doing. Having read a number of people who have written their doctoral theses, and they've usually in education concentrated on poverty as one of the real problems of education. And what Steve just said about nutrition and others, but I'd like to see maybe the discussion or the take on the fact that 80% of the students at Dunlap High School live in the city of Peoria. So if you could maybe follow up, because many of those children are not necessarily in poverty.
Member Blair?
Thank you guys so much for this. As a data person, much like Rob, I love to see data, although this is very eye-opening data, I guess is the best way to put it. By having data like this, these are ways to measure success as we move forward to see how these discrepancies change. But as Member Renaud mentioned, some of these may be multi-generational. Looking at success indicators that are more short-term may be a way to also then help us see the improvement as we move forward in the next few years.
Any other questions? Well, Tim and Mary, thank you for your leadership on this. I know it hasn't been easy, and it was a conversation that was long overdue in this community. And what gave me hope from this thing is serving on many boards and even asking people to volunteer. Thank you to your team for volunteering. This was a commission that had no shortage of community members stepping forward to volunteer. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to look on the last page, I think, of the red document that you had, and it shows all the community members that were involved. So this could not have been done without your leadership, and I know the extensive hours that you've both put in on this and your team. So from the county, much appreciated.
Very much appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Next up, we have two discussion. First one is about carbon sequestration. Andrew will be giving that presentation. This was what we had talked about a month ago about bringing some information to the board from staff. The members, well, Renaud left, Nate left. All right. We'll turn the floor over to Andrew to start the presentation.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Andrew Braun, Assistant Director in the Planning and Zoning Department. Today we are here to discuss CO2 pipelines as they relate to Peoria County. There has been a lot of discussion about CO2 pipelines here recently. Back in January of this year, there was an email sent to board members inviting them to watch a YouTube, I guess, discussion, if you will. Back in February, there was public comment regarding the upcoming carbon pipeline. And then in the meantime, Chairman Dillon had requested that the Planning and Zoning Department and the State's Attorney's Office look into some of the information that was being presented and reach out to the developer of the proposed pipeline, which is Wolf Carbon Solutions. So what I'm here today to do is to present the information that we have learned, to not take a position, but just to educate the board members on what is essentially upcoming within our community and across the state of Illinois. There we go. I'm sorry about that. All right, so carbon sequestration goes by a couple names. We're talking about carbon pipelines. We're talking about carbon capture and storage, and then carbon sequestration. So what exactly is that? These industrial companies are producing carbon dioxide emissions that are being released into our ozone. The federal government has challenged the state and federal to create programs and processes to capture this emission. The gases are cooled to temperatures that convert them into liquids. The liquids are then transported through pipelines and either reused or recycled for other uses, or pumped miles below the surface for storage. Sounds crazy, right? I'm not a geologist, but apparently this is the way to reduce our carbon emissions, and it is the future. There are currently about 10 of these sites or pipelines operating throughout the United States, and there are about 31 across the entire country. So it is something that does exist, may not exist in the state of Illinois, but it does exist in our southern states, and it does exist in Europe and Africa. Not sure why my slides are not clicking through here today. There we go. All right, sorry about that. So this is just a graphic. So they're showing that the carbon dioxide generated through industrial processes is being captured into these pipelines. They're steel pipes, and it's being transported miles, hundreds of miles, thousands of miles in some cases, to it ultimately goes to these sequester sites. I don't know what's going on here. This worked great yesterday. All right, well, maybe this slide will change for me. So the state of Illinois authorized the Carbon Dioxide Transportation and Sequestration Act in 2011. So this is not something that is necessarily new at the state level. However, we have not seen any of these pipelines. At one point in the past 10 years, there was a proposal, but that pipeline did not ultimately come through. So effective 2011, the Carbon Dioxide Transportation and Sequestration Act authorized the Illinois Commerce Commission, there you go, to, after a hearing, grant the authority for a certificate to construct these pipelines. So much like the county's process where we go through our zoning board of appeals, our land use committee, and then our county board to grant the authority to do something, that's what the ICC is doing. They're not giving you a permit to do it, they're giving you the authority to do it. And I'll walk through what some of their conditions and processes are in here in just a moment. The state of Illinois has deemed this to be a benefit to the welfare of Illinois, the people of Illinois, by advancing economic development, environmental protection, and energy protection to the state. There was a study conducted through the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, that demonstrated that there is anticipated $1.6 billion economic development factor in the development of these pipelines. So the state is looking at this as job creation, reduction of carbon emissions and greenhouse gases, and advancements in technology. One important thing to note that the opposition will point out to you is the act does authorize the use of eminent domain, and so we'll get into a little bit more on that. I have a map here, perhaps. This particular pipeline, proposed by Wolf Carbon Solutions, called the Mount Simon Pipeline, is going to start in Cedar Rapids. It's going to make its way east to Davenport, where it's going to have a trunk line that pushes out to Clinton, Iowa, and then it's going to cross into Illinois, coming through to Peoria with a trunk line to the Peoria facility here in Peoria, and then ultimately down to Decatur, where it will be sequestered. At this point, the only sequestration site, the only site where it's going to be pumped into the ground is actually in Decatur, and they have been doing this there on a testing capacity for the last 11 years. There's an ADM site there, and they actually partner with the local community college to study that data. The wells that push this carbon dioxide into the ground are permitted through the Illinois EPA. I'd really love for you to see the map. I think I got sabotaged here, maybe.
Scott, can we make sure that we get a copy of this?
Absolutely.
All right, so I will brief you on Wolf Carbon Solutions. So Wolf is the developer of the proposed pipeline. They are out of Denver, Colorado. They currently operate a pipeline in Canada that has been in operation for over 3 years. They are anticipating filing in April of this year with the Illinois Commerce Commission. Again, that pipeline is going to run from Cedar Rapids, Iowa to Decatur, Illinois, with the ability to capture CO2 from the Alto facility in Pekin, as well as Peoria here in Peoria. Their preferred route for this pipeline follows right-of-way as best as possible. They've indicated that they'd like to stay about 10 foot off of those right-of-ways and co-locate it with other pipelines and utilities. They will enter into an agricultural impact mitigation agreement with the Illinois Department of Agriculture prior to construction. So similar to what we've seen with our solar and wind projects, that AMA agreement is through the Department of Agriculture to address some of the agricultural concerns. Once they have the approval from the ICC, they will then make sure that their proposal meets all of the requirements of PHMSA. So yet another acronym here, PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. They will look at their emergency response plans, and they will make sure that safety training is done on an annual basis for emergency responders. Still nothing. All right. One thing to note is that public meetings are not required as part of this process. However, Wolf has indicated to us through a sit-down meeting they held here in Planning and Zoning about a month ago that they do intend to have public meetings with impacted communities and community leaders. That will not occur until after the filing is made, because at this point they're still kind of keeping some of the details under close wrap until it's made public. That may be at the county level, that may be on more of a tri-county level, because the enormous length of the pipeline may not allow them to meet with each community individually. Properties that are impacted by the pipelines will have leases in perpetuity. So this is once you sign, you're committed forever. Crop loss is assumed. They are acknowledging that. And as part of their initial agreement, they're going to pay you on a de-escalating scale for 4 years for that assumed crop loss. They intend to construct using regional labor. An economic impact study for Illinois, as I referenced before, has been completed and submitted to the state of Illinois. And Wolf does intend to own and operate this pipeline. They are not going to pass it off to any type of third party. Their timeline, which is still not on the screen, April 2023, they're anticipating their filing. In the second quarter, they will begin their initial outreach to landowners. So the corridor itself is going to entail 200 feet wide of potential location. They don't have to identify specifically the path that it's going to take, but they have to do it within a plus minus 200 foot measurement. So they're going to notify all these property owners approximately 14 days after the filing. At that time, once the filing's made public, we'll be able to get copies of it. We'll make sure that that is distributed to our committees and our county board. Construction of this will occur late 2024, weather permitting, or as snow breaks in Q1 of 2025. And they're hoping that this project is in service in fourth quarter of 2025 or first quarter of 2026, depending on when that construction initially begins. So that's Wolf Carbon Solutions. They're the developer. They've met with planning and zoning. They've been very straightforward about their intentions. We've also heard from the Coalition to Stop CO2 Pipelines. So they had a webinar on February 7th, 2023. There were farmers, there were landowners, there were folks from academia, there were experts, and they wanted to make sure that their concerns over this type of development were conveyed to effectively anyone who wanted to know about it. There are other pipelines throughout the state of Illinois, so that coalition did not focus specifically on the Wolf pipeline. There is another one that is going to perhaps impact more communities. But one of the points they wanted to make was the service cost to counties and municipalities. Training and upgrading our emergency management service response services. So do our firefighters, do our EMT personnel, do they have the appropriate equipment for themselves, for the people that they're responding to? The infrastructure, do they have the appropriate vehicles? What is that cost going to be to our communities? The reliance on federal subsidies, as I indicated, there's a lot of push for this type of development at the federal level, and as a result, there's a lot of federal subsidies. So their concerns are that they're using federal subsidies, tax breaks, and such to fund private projects, which essentially are for profit. The long-term liability of these projects, we indicated that the easements are in perpetuity. We know that as our infrastructure degrades, that improvements are necessary. What type of liability are we going to have when we have to start replacing these pipelines in 20 years, in 40 years, in 60 years? So safety and maintenance responsibilities for years and years to come. They had concerns about private companies using eminent domain to take properties or effectively portions of properties to be able to install their pipelines. Wolf has indicated they do not plan to use eminent domain, but as we suggested earlier, the state authorizes the use of that eminent domain. The safety, the potential health effects in the case of a pipeline rupture, that's going to be to the environment, that's going to be to our population, and that's also going to be to our farm stock. Farm impacts is a big concern of theirs. Soil mixing, when you dig these pipelines, what are you putting back on top? Soil compaction and tile severance from the weight of the equipment that is going to be used to install. They also wanted to point out the crop production loss. There's been studies that have been conducted in the state of Iowa demonstrating crop production loss is a real thing. Once again, Wolf has indicated that as part of their easement agreements, they will compensate on at least a 4-year basis. Still nothing on the screen. All right, the ICC certificate process. So again, the ICC is the Illinois Commerce Commission. They are the ones that are going to grant the authority to move forward with these projects. So that authority was given to them in 2011. Step one is the pipeline company is gonna file an application with a proposed route, that 200-foot route, and an alternate route. After that application has been filed, it's docketed and assigned to an administrative law judge. So there's going to be effectively a hearing officer or a judge that's going to handle the case. That judge is then going to enter a pre-scheduling order, and he's going to, or she, is going to identify and outline all the key dates in the process. So on such and such date, you need to have me this. On such and such date, we're going to have this type of hearing, so on and so forth. They'll also receive the written testimony from the applicant. So how does that differ than the original application? The written testimony is really a question and answer response. Assuming any and all questions that might come up in those hearings, they're going to give you their proposal with those answers. Then the ICC staff will take all of that information, they will review it, and they will write a recommendation. That recommendation will go to an evidentiary hearing. So interested parties, interveners, ICC, administrative law judge, everybody's going to take part in this hearing. Throughout the process, your ability to participate in the hearing is through something called being an intervener. So if you want to file as an intervener, which Peoria County could take that route, we'd get notified of all the information as it is filed, as it is made public, and we would then have the opportunity to speak or respond at that hearing. If you are not an intervener, you are not privy to that type of involvement in the process. All their comments are made through intervening, and it must be done in writing so that it's documented. At this point, the administrative law judge is going to issue a proposed order. Everyone's going to have the opportunity to review that, provide additional comment, and then ultimately the ICC is going to issue their determination or their authorization, the certificate of authority. That entire process takes place over 11 months. Again, we're anticipating Wolf to file in April of this year, meaning that that process will take place throughout the remainder of the year and into first quarter of 2024. So now they've got this certificate, what's next? Who's looking over this? This is not coming before Planning and Zoning for a building permit. This is not going to a different committee to review the plans. PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, who's authorized under the Code of Federal Regulations, sets safety standards and reporting standards that have to be met. So these companies are identifying that they're able to meet these standards, and as such, they're going to file a notification saying that we're proposing this pipeline, we meet all of these requirements, and in the next 60 days, we're going to start construction on our project. There's a lot of safety regulations in there, filing reports, filing annual reports, accident reports, so on and so forth, testing requirements. There's quite a bit of regulation. The PHMSA regulations have existed for the last 11 years or so. They are currently being reviewed, and it is anticipated that new regulations will be released in 2024. The last slide I have here, good luck, outlines existing pipelines in Peoria County. So I know one question might be, what about other pipelines we have here? There are gas transmission pipelines running east-west through the county as well as north-south, and there are also hazardous liquid pipelines running east-west throughout Peoria County. So pipelines in Peoria County are not a new thing, but this specific type of pipeline is a new thing in Peoria County. So where does that leave the county board and the executive committee? I'd actually like to turn that over to our state's attorney's office to talk about potential actions that Peoria County may be able to take.
I think this is probably the question that most of you guys are interested in, and that we'll hear from the public wondering what we can do about this. As Andrew said, the authority comes from the state. There's a state statute that gives the ICC the ability, they handle the process. They are the ones who are going to approve whether or not a pipeline is able to be constructed. So when you're looking at the county level, well, first of all, Andrew also pointed this out, there hasn't been a CO2 pipeline in Illinois yet. There is a pipeline right now that's a little further down the road, the Navigator pipeline that you maybe have seen in the news. There's things are evolving as the Navigator pipeline, as that process continues. Lots of conversations. There are several bills in the state legislature right now regarding pipelines. So I say all of this with we're going to have to take a wait and see approach, not in a lazy, not responsive approach, but we're going to have to react as things evolve in real time. So what can the county do at the county level? Andrew said there's no special use permit avenue like we would normally do through the ZBA coming up through the county board. There are things, though, in our code right now that could come into play. So there are permitting requirements through for example, the highway department for our roads, making sure that the roads are protected. There are things like if there's any above ground structures, we're going to have our normal building permits. So there are sections of our code, both that planning and zoning and highway department oversee, that we're going to take a look at and make sure, looking at things through this lens now, are we in a good position with our current county codes to have some control over how things get done if a pipeline is permitted in this area. So roads is a big one that if these go along the right of way, that's a huge impact for then what else can be done. Road work could be done, and other utilities. So this is again the wait and see. Because we don't know what the proposed route is going to be. So we could make a whole lot of guesses, but we're just going to have to stay on top of things and stay responsive. Look into things as they come up. Andrew mentioned being an intervener in the ICC process. Most counties are all, like in the Navigator pipeline scenario, the counties are intervening so that they are part of the process, so that if something needs to be said and avoid, their concerns on a route need to be voiced, then they have the ability to do that. So our office has been in touch with several different counties, attorneys who do this ICC commission work with the ICC commission itself. So we're being proactive. We're educating ourselves and getting ourselves in position to then be able to respond. But there's not even an application on file right now. We're just going to have to, play things by ear as they go on. But happy to field any questions. Also, always the attorney prefers to take things either into closed session or offline if we're talking about legal advice, but happy to field general questions about the ICC process or our codes.
So I would think put it out to the board just for some direction. Past practices would be that we would intervene just so that we are receiving data, but the county board would not take a position of pro or against the pipeline, since it will be decided by the Illinois Commerce Commission. But by intervening, we would have the information back to staff that would give us the right to address our concerns if there become concerns later. So unless I hear differently, that would be the process that we would go down. Mr. Phelan.
Are there any cons to intervening? Are there any cons to intervening?
Not as, if we do not intervene, we do not receive the information that is filed by Wolf, unless Wolf would so choose to give it to us. But they have not been forthcoming in information, so I wouldn't see that, but there's really no reason for us not to intervene, to reserve our rights to receive information. Sure.
if we hire an attorney that does regulation work, there would be the cost to that. There have been counties that just the state's attorney has filed and intervened. So, but no, I don't think there's a con to intervening there. From what I've spoken with attorneys and the commission attorneys, it runs the gamut. There are some interveners that are extremely involved and submitting, lots of information. I'm going to say probably against, not usually for. But then there are interveners that just, we're standing here getting the information in case we feel that we need to jump in. So, and I think most counties are somewhere in the middle. They provide information like about the roads, provide testimony and opinions on things like the roads and the emergency response needs that would arise. You're going to need the resources to train and equip. So probably somewhere in between. But no, I don't think there's a con to intervening.
Paul.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anybody can answer the question, but the what if something were to bad happen, like a pipeline would rupture. I saw the video on the Sierra Club sent out to me. Looking at where it's going through Peoria County, that's going through all of our rural area that all has basically volunteer fire departments and so forth. Is this Wolf Carbon Solutions going to be paying for any of the training that these fire departments are going to have, or is that just something that each individual municipality, fire department, all that has to do? These are just some of the questions that it would be nice to know ahead of time, because it's a private enterprise going through, but yet it affects a lot of our municipalities and our fire departments and all that have their own budgets, and if it's going to cost them more, are they going to pay any of that for that? I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate on this.
So I think I can address some of those. There is a House bill that would look to address some of that, and then that will be taken into consideration by the ICC. Not speaking from Wolf, I have not talked to Wolf, but just 2 weeks ago I participated in the Vistra community workshop that they had in Bartonville, and Limestone presented those exact questions to their leadership team. I think with Wolf saying they would have public meetings, that is a good time for our local volunteer fire departments to bring up some of those concerns. But ICC will address some of those concerns and potentially a House bill out there. So we don't know all the legislation pieces currently moving out there at the moment. Did I miss anything? Sorry for my coughing. I all of a sudden didn't cough all day. Now I have a tickle in the back of my throat I can't get rid of. Ms. Blair.
I am aware that no one around this circle isn't a carbon scientist, but do we know of any data that suggests that this is better than just using eminent domain and putting in a bunch of trees and preserving wetlands and those kind of things? I mean, why is this so cool versus the traditional ways of capturing carbon?
I really don't have an answer to that. What they're able to recycle some of the carbon and reuse it for other purposes through this process, and then they're going to deposit it a mile beneath the earth, deep into the rock formations of Mount Simon, where it will stay indefinitely until it's calcified. That's unfortunately my scientific or geologist.
That's all the science you got on it.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I just planting trees don't generally explode and cause problems, so I just wonder why this is better than other methods. I'm aware that you guys probably can't answer that, but it is a concern of mine to help one private company when other methods could be supportive of lots of other communities around here.
Yeah, maybe just additional comments is, I've got awareness of one of my clients. It's an industrial plant in Mitchell, Indiana, that's going to do carbon sequester, and they're shipping it by rail to a to-be named location in Illinois soon. But again, they're using rail and rail cars to compress it and ship it. And then you get into the question of, after the rail incident in Ohio and such, these companies are going to find a way to move it one way or the other. So we also need to have the awareness of, okay, if everyone takes a stance of, the pipeline's horrible, what about these rail cars that are probably going by today at Edelstein? I'm sure they're going by with carbon in them today, that if they had an incident, we'd be facing similar issues, and we're probably not even anywhere prepared. But again, additional, just kind of broaden the scope of, they are going to do something with this, and we just need to be wise ambassadors for our citizens around it.
Which, member Blair, there was a, I believe a couple weeks ago, article on Capitol Facts from Senator Duckworth was in Asia and talking about the geology of Illinois, and there actually is a company, a very large company, I believe South Korea, that was going to locate in the Decatur area for these specific reasons, for the natural geology of Illinois. Apparently is perfect to capture carbon, and that is why Illinois, a lot of companies are looking to locate here, or the numbers that were talked about for economic development are probably actually on the lighter side of what, and most of these companies have to find a way. They're not at a point where they cannot be carbon free. So in that transition period, they have to figure out ways, and there are incentives for them to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a proponent of market-based models to solve problems. I just want to make sure that the benefits outweigh the risks. And so if it does an amazing job of capturing carbon, that's great. I just wish we had more data on that.
Well, as more information comes into us, we'll keep you updated on when they do file and when we file as an intervener, and go from there if it's agreeable. But please don't hesitate, if you have questions or would like some concerns addressed, to reach out, and we will try to do that. Yep.
If we can gather back up the packets at the end, you guys, they'll email out a clean copy, but these include my attorney notes in them. So we just don't, those just can't circulate. Sorry. It's not that exciting, but. Yeah, you'll get a clean copy.
And then before we go to standing committee agendas, I'll just go to, was there public comment that would like to be received? Mr. Wooding? You have to come up to the...
I apologize for my ignorance on the procedure here. It's my first time addressing the county board, but recent, within a year, resident of Peoria County, so come over from Tazewell County. But Evan Wooding, I'm the UA International Representative for plumbers, pipe fitters, steam fitters, and HVAC technicians. Represent just under 25,000 members in the state of Illinois, and 231 of those members reside in Peoria County. So obviously projects like this are huge for us, but more specifically, I just want to speak, everyone knows the environmental challenges we have on the globe. And to be a leader with many different tools, whether it's different hydrogens, carbon capture, and all that to bridge us to our next energy future, manufacturing future, we got to use all of our tools. And a lot of the opponents, they're no, and every day we're losing ground because we're not doing something. So we need to be doing something. I saw a statistic at a function I was at just a month ago, and China bringing one coal plant on every week mitigated 15 years worth of advancements that we made in the United States regarding our environment. So if the U.S. can lead with these different tools, spread that technology across the globe, we then gain ground on the ultimate goal of protecting our planet. So don't, get educated on it. Obviously, we don't want to create more harm, but we just can't not do anything and allow the problem to happen until we find the magic lottery ticket that buys our way out of it, I guess is a lack of a better term. But this is a tool for addressing climate change. It's a good tool. It has the ability to get larger quantities than trees and this and that all at one time. And a lot of these are being proposed to pull CO2 out of ethanol facilities, which is renewable fuel. So if we don't address those concerns and we have to shut down renewable fuel, what are we doing then? So it's a compounding issue. We have multiple tools at our disposal. We need to use them as a bridge to our next generation to protect our manufacturing and our energy productions. So that's all I had. I appreciate your time.
Any other questions? Or any other public comment? We'll move to standing committees. Coach Salzer.
All right, we've got two from the infrastructure, and if I am incorrect in anything, we got Amy here to correct me on these. This very first one dates really to what Amy and her staff did, and they had made applications and a good argument for the use of money for the area of the Glassford and Hannah City Road, and they made it, and she received a letter back, and some of you may have read that letter in the piece that we handle here from infrastructure, and Amy had argued that there was a safety factor on that particular road, and so the Illinois Department of Transportation, they got money from the federal government, and what it was under, it's called the Highway Improvement Highway Safety Improvement Project, and so if you remember back in about January, we dealt with this a little bit. We gave her permission to, of course, go ahead with this, and she hired Hutchinson Engineering, and they are in the process, of course, doing what they've been hired to do, and they are preparing, of course, the piece of road that needs to be improved most of all, and it's between Smithville. It's on Hannah City Glassford Road. The project starts at Smithville and it ends down at Lancaster, and so that project has to be done by I think it's October the 1st of about 25. So we will be doing this project, and we also know that the state of Illinois, of course, will control the money that is made available, and they also will do the bid for us. We will have nothing to do with the particular bid. The second item there, as you see, it has to do with our transferring the jurisdiction of one of the roads, and it's going to be done this year as soon as they get all the paperwork done and so forth. And many of you probably are familiar with it. It used to be in Rob's district, I think, but now I don't know whether it belongs to Danny Phelan or who. Do you know who? Okay, Brandy. Okay, Brandy, you expanded north a little bit then. Anyway, it's the road, and some of you probably traveled, they got their sidewalks in and so forth, but we in the city who had the joint agreement in getting this done, and we did the construction part and so forth. They did more so the engineering and right-of-way and things such as that. On Glen Avenue, between Sheridan. If you know where Sheridan is, where it's just right below Notre Dame High School, and there's a Walgreens there, I think, and so forth. But from there over to what we usually refer to as Knoxville, the state of Illinois, of course, refers to it as as Route 40. But I always think of Route 40 out there by Route 6. A lot farther north. Anyway, we are going to finish this summer as soon as we get the paperwork, and we will then turn that road over to the city so that they got jurisdiction of it. Now, whether you know it or not, throughout the county, we've got about 24 to 26 miles of road in these municipalities. Within the city of Peoria, I think we've got about 13 miles. I know a couple of the county roads in my particular district are have to do with Gale Avenue as well as Richwoods. And so we have to maintain a certain part of Gale, I should say, not all of Gale. But anyway, those are the two resolutions. Let me go back to the first resolution, because I just thought of something that I should have put in there. What we're doing in this project to create more safety, of course, is to widen the road 4 feet. Now that's 2 feet on each side of the road, not 4 feet and 4 feet, but 2 feet on each side of the road. We're going to put in some rumble strips, and we also are going to do a better job of probably painting the edge of the road and things such as that. Okay.
Thank you, Member Salzer. Next up, Member Duncan, Ways and Means.
Yes, the Ways and Means Committee had one resolution in regards to the monthly delinquent taxes, and it was approved.
Member Rosenbaum, Land Use.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had one zoning case. It was a petition of Peoria County. We're changing some of our rules because the state changed the rules on, it's mainly on solar farms and wind farms. They're making it so we can't have rules more stringent than what the state has. It makes it a more level playing field for the whole state. So all the counties will have the same rules, and that passed unanimously. And we had to have it passed within 120 days of the governor signing it. So that went, and then we had 2 subdivision waivers by the same person. One was he's taking off a 2-acre plot with a house on it, I believe. One of them was so he could use as well, and the other one, the ground didn't have 30 foot of actual road abutment or whatever. They're going to be using a easement, and both of those passed.
Thank you, Member Rosenbaum. Member Ricker.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we did not have any resolutions in operations, but we did have a session just to update on the status of labor negotiations, to update the members. That's all, thanks.
Thank you. Member Renault and Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did not have a resolution. We did have an update on the timeline for the health campus as far as getting bids in and how quickly we need to turn that around. So just be on the lookout for additional information.
Thank you. Member Allison, Public Safety.
I think due to the length of Rob's committee, everybody was here for public safety. But we did have 2 resolutions that accepted grants related to our mobile neuter unit, and then also the feral cat discussion. So.
Thank you. And then Finance was canceled. Miscellaneous, anything for miscellaneous? I have some notes for the board, but I'll take any. So next month, we will have, staff has been preparing a more in-depth conversation about ARPA dollars and our use for it. I believe the slide deck is about over 40 at the moment. To best get the board information, if you do have some questions that you would like addressed in that slide deck, or for staff to be able to prepare, please email Administrator Sorrell by, say, end of business day on Monday. So that way we can either gather all the right information or be able to be prepared for it. So that gives them time to prepare for committees next month. Vice Chairwoman Williams will be leading the county board meeting. I will be spring break, our next county board meeting, so I'll be calling in from Florida. In the weekly update this week, I did it. We had talked about the proclamation order, and I kind of mixed up the first 2 months starting in April, but there'll be the order. Basically, the way I did it was first month was 1 and 18, second month is 2 and 17 in descending order. The first month has kind of got mixed up already, but that's okay. So if you're curious, I have wrote in the months, and we'll put it in your weekly update, so look and see what your month are. If you don't want to choose anybody, that is fine too, but that is also an option. Or if you have stuff during the course of the year, please let me know. I just thought this would be a good way to give people to recognize something. And then Member Blair and I did meet with Administrator Sorrell. If you're happy to answer any questions in regards to that. For correction, we did say in the meeting, the salary adjustment from last year was correct. So if you remember that I had said that the number was wrong, the number we had was wrong, and it was correct in the actual payments from the right formula that was used. So there was no underpayment from last year. So I just wanted to correct that across all board members. And then that's basically anything else under miscellaneous? Seeing none, meeting adjourned.